we've gone long. Welcome. Glad that you're here.
Yeah. Hey, welcome back. Continuing again through some really great verses in chapter 12. Challenging ones today. Yesterday we saw kind of setting the bar for our behavior. We continue along those lines today, but I would say these are a little bit more personal, maybe a little more pointed in some cases, and maybe more difficult. So let's take a look at a few verses here, and we'll talk about them. Verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. We did 9 yesterday.
Oh, you're right, zeal. Okay, I'm sorry. My bad, everybody.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah, you're right.
Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. So this is, straight out of the gospel. This is one of the more challenging calls to the faith, to return good when you receive bad. And this is immeasurably hard to do, and it is extremely important, as Jesus mentions it repeatedly. Bless those who persecute you. And there's a certain unfairness in that. There is certainly a difficulty in that, but this is the thing that Christians are called to be, is not people who return curse for curse, but who give grace even when they receive insult. And this is a high bar that is being set for us.
Yeah, let's remember that we ended yesterday in 13 with the idea of extending hospitality to strangers. Those are connected. The people who we are most tempted to persecute are those who are farthest from us, who are at least in our circle. And I think there's a sense in which the idea of not returning curse for curse to weather persecution as it comes does demand a kind of willingness to practice humility and grace on behalf of the one who is least connected to your life. And, writ large, Clint, couldn't we say on some level that amidst the separation of this last year and sort of the distancing that has happened, it has in some ways seemed easier to pick out them and us. And I wonder if some of that idea isn't connected towards this reality that the farther we are from people by distance, by sort of thinking, by all of these sort of metrics of ways that we separate ourselves, the easier it is to respond to someone in spite or in curse or against them, as opposed to trying to find other ways. And so there's a practicality to it. But I also think that there's a call to it in our present moment to try to cut against that temptation.
Yeah, I think it is easy at times to read verses like this and not take them seriously. And I don't mean to dismiss them. I mean to assume they don't mean what they say, to assume they mean, well, the person who cuts you off in traffic, or be nice when you're at the store and somebody, budges in line. But when you understand that these words were written to a church that was literally being persecuted, I think we see how incredibly difficult this new standard in Jesus is. This is real. Bless the people who really do curse you, the people who don't care for you, the people who accuse you of things, the people who hurt you, revile you. Don't join them on that level. And I can tell you what it means. I wish I could tell you how to do it, other than that this is really hard. And I think we're very close to the core of the gospel when we encounter verses like that. It perhaps gets a little more communal as we move to the next verse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. There's a great deal of wisdom in these verses. Share both joy and sadness. And sometimes we struggle with one or the other. Sometimes we lack compassion. Other times, maybe we have a hard time celebrating with others. And so I think there's a broadness to this, a wideness to this that helps. Be with those, if there are those in joy, then join them in joy. And if there are those with tears, then join them in tears. And live in harmony with one another. Be connected with both ends of the community, those who are doing well and those who are struggling. And don't be proud. We've talked about some of that before. Associate with the lowly. Don't think of those as underneath you or unworthy of you. And then I think maybe a lot of that is summed up in this: do not claim to be wiser than you are. I've seen this statistic before, but I recently ran across it again in a book. Something like 75 to 80% of people in surveys claim that they are above average intelligence, which is a statistical problem. But don't claim to be wiser than you are. Don't try to appear as something you're not.
Yeah, and recognize, you mentioned this as being communal, Clint. I think it's worth just sort of explicitly saying that these are marks of Christian fellowship, and this is a checklist not just for our personal action, but for the kind of community that we seek to form as Christians. And that makes it even more difficult. We all know how hard it is to wake up in the morning and to commit ourselves that day to the difficult work of loving those who are hard or who are difficult to us, or the challenge of being with someone who's rejoicing and you're not in that moment, and seeking to try to be with them and honor that. And same way when it goes the other way. I think it's difficult to be in Christian fellowship and to see someone reflecting on a thing or doing a thing, and to not become puffed up when you think you see a better way, or when you want to sort of make it clear to a person you're doing it wrong. There's so many ways that community gets off track. And I think the fact that Paul sets this standard out for us as Christians is both a recognition of how highly he understands the importance of the Christian church to be, but also how deliberately Paul seeks to lead the church in faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Because I really don't think, as a Christian leader, that Paul writes this thinking that this is a report card that the church is going to get an A+ on. I don't think he's setting this out there like the Green Beret Christian church somewhere is going to accomplish this. I think Paul has in mind that this is the standard in Christ. This is the image of what a fruitful Christian community should look like, and we trust God to inculcate those gifts in our midst.
Yeah, I think that very much Paul is painting a picture here of what Christianity looks like in context with others. Those who rejoice, those who mourn, those who curse you, those who persecute you. What does it look like to be Christian throughout these various connections? And some of what makes it specific, makes it unique. Don't claim to be wise. Don't lift yourself up. Associate with the loyal, the lowly. Don't be proud. Here we continue. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. Again, don't hit back. Think about what is good. Think about the impact your actions have in the sight of other people. There is this responsibility, this idea that you are not responsible just to yourself, but to those around you as well, even those outside the faith in some instances. And one thing that I appreciate about these words, Michael, is that they are so lean. There's very little filler here. Just from phrase to phrase, Paul gets to the heart of, there are sermons within these sentences, and he doesn't need to preach them because he has honed it down to such a sharp edge that he can get by saying it in 4 or 5 words, and we need sentences and paragraphs to try and pages to try and unpack it.
That's the difficult beauty of simplicity, Clint. any one of us who knows someone who has spent some time on a craft and has gotten good at it knows that they make it look way easier than it actually is. I had a fun conversation once with Rochelle actually about the piano, and I was sort of asking her about how a piano worked. And it was funny. She said, well, a piano is essentially just a hammer that hits a string, right? And, oh, well, yeah, I guess. She said the trick is learning how to use the hammer to make something musical and not to make something that, right? And there's an amazing thing, whether that's the fundamentals of basketball or that's the way that you sort of get good at cycling. Every craft has this thing that when you boil it down, it's a simple task, and it's the simplicity of it that makes it challenging. These spiritual gifts, you don't need a PhD to understand, and yet to live them out, you need a life equivalent of 50 PhDs. You need a kind of wisdom that doesn't just come by thinking about a thing. It's a kind of wisdom that comes in thinking and practicing and failing and trying and apologizing. And that's the beauty of the faith, is how simple things can become unbelievably rewarding and life-changing as we live into them. And we sometimes, I think we miss that, Clint. We get into cruise control, we make it to church on Sunday, and we miss the opportunity that lies ahead to become fashioned in the image of the one who lived this perfectly, and we forget that call that lies ahead of us.
No, I think it is extremely difficult to do simple well, and it generally is a mark of maturity and mastery. To be able to pull off simple, it is far more difficult than it appears, and Paul has done that. And then we finish with one of my favorite verses as we get to our stopping point for the day, verse 18 here. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. I think this is, the great challenge. Yes, some things are beyond your control. Some things we are not able to do. But if possible, as far as it depends on you, as far as you can participate in it, live peaceably with everyone. Go as many miles as you can toward that end, and do whatever you have the ability to do to make that reality. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with all. That's a great verse. I like that one a lot.
And the early Christians had an interesting vantage on that, Clint, because when they experienced persecution, it wasn't people being mean to them. It was being kicked out of their job. They're no longer allowed to be a meat cutter because they wouldn't join the guild that had an idol that celebrated that animal, right? And so they couldn't be part of it anymore. Or the men, women, children who paid the ultimate price, who became martyrs for the faith because they were unwilling to recant Christ. There's a kind of deep struggle and challenge in the word to live peaceably when the world is not a peaceful place for you. When you say, to whatever extent is possible for you, demonstrate this peace, requires a kind of persistence and courage that is hard for us to even get our minds around, yet alone for us to understand the kind of weight and the kind of soul wearyingness that it would take to live in a culture that was hostile to Christians in every way, and yet to be those who lived peaceably to whatever extent you could. I mean, that goes against human nature at its deepest core, to respond to a moment of people seeking to do harm and to seek to live peacefully, to pay good for evil. I mean, these words were not theoretical for the Romans, and I think it's good for us to remember that.
Yeah, it's a significant challenge to say that the impetus for peace, for good relationship, for connection, falls on the side of the one that has faith. That because of faith, that responsibility is primarily ours. Mm-hmm. And that again, lots of challenge in this verse as we finish this week. I think there's certainly a lot for us to feel stretched by as we make our way through this section.
Thanks for being with us, everybody.
Have a good weekend.
Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you for joining us for this daily Bible study. If this is your first time, welcome. We are so glad that you have joined us for this time of intentional study of God's Word. You will find in the description of this video a link to our website. We would love to get to know who you are. We'd love to reach out and greet you personally. But be sure, whether or not this is your first time, to like this video. If you're on Facebook, share it so that other people might be able to find it too. If you're on YouTube, consider subscribing. You'll receive more content like this every day at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. On top of that, every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we release a Pastor Talk podcast, which goes through different series, but all of them about faith and life and discipleship of Jesus Christ. Friends, regardless of how many times you've been with us, we hope that this day has been meaningful for you as you seek to follow Jesus Christ. So until next time, be blessed. We look forward to seeing you soon.